Hi guys, Brindley Little here from your Land Partner and Property Developers Academy, coming to you for your next installment of 100 in 100. This is installment number 65, and today we are going through an introduction into the funding side of the development process. So up to this point, and most recently, Richard has taken you through the planning stage of the development life cycle, and now we've come to an end, and we're moving into funding. Now, as we move deeper and deeper into the development process, this is where we are going to need, different specialists involved, which puts the emphasis on building your team and having the right experience and the right connections around you to enable each process to kind of work as it should. So looking at the funding process, obviously we're going to want to build out our team from the perspective of access to brokers, maybe even direct access to routes to funding, finance companies, etc. But one of the key things to funding is how you put across your experience that you've currently got or currently accrued. So experience is often the key, and gives you the direction in terms of where to look for funds for the entire process. That's from acquisition, perhaps even funding the planning, and obviously through to the build, and then through to the exit as well. So depending on your level of experience will perhaps dictate where you go to obtain funds, and it'll also dictate the kind of rates that you're likely to pay. Obviously, the first one is generally the hardest, because then when you can start to demonstrate that you have direct experience in what you're doing, then it might open up different funding avenues, and you might find yourself building relationships that will enable you to get better rates. Obviously, we've talked about funding during the appraisal process, because obviously at that stage when we're trying to stack a deal, we want to make sure that we're allowing an appropriate amount for development finance. Now, obviously at this stage, we've secured the deal. We're running a lot of conversations concurrently with people at this stage. It's not an end-to-end process. We're not going to get planning then look for funding. We're doing these things all at once. So during the funding stage, this is where we are starting to understand where we're going to get the funds from and what the kind of rates we are likely to pay, and almost getting to the point where we've got some decisions from the lenders in principle that they're going to lend further down the line. So as for the 100 and 100 sort of funding mini series, we're going to be taking you through on various sessions in this mini series, through your sort of funding options that are available to you. We're going to look at the entire capital stack. We're going to look at things like cash flow. We're going to look at things like the fundamentals of raising finance. We're also going to look at things like the risk money mindset. We're also going to look at things like terminology as well. And terminology is a good one when it comes to demonstrating your competence, experience and expertise, because that's just the same for across all the different areas of the process. So the more that you know, the more that you can demonstrate, the easier generally it'll become, the better connections that you'll make. So when it comes to funding options, we're going to go through some in this first introductory video, and for some of them we may go into detail in further videos, because that there's lots of different ways. There's a plethora of options to finance deals these days. Obviously, back in the day, back when Richard, was in, quite active in terms of what we were doing and different deals and things like that. Way back when, it was generally much more simple when it comes to, well, you've only generally got one or two routes that you can go down You go to your bank and you get funding for your projects. But nowadays, there's lots of different options available to you. So looking at a couple of the options that we do have here, obviously there's different iterations, that you can go down into the detail on, but effectively, your first port of call is your own money. Now I know that there's a lot of people out there, actively advertising that you can do development with none of your own money. That's probably a topic for a different discussion. From our perspective, but it's from our point of view, it's important that you've got your own skin in the game, and that also opens up many different options for you for other funding, because other funders, other investors are going to want to know, what you've got on the line effectively as well. If you're solely dealing with investor money, you've got nothing to lose effectively yourself. Then it's going to cut down some of your funding options, possibly. So always start with your own available funds, and typically that will be classed as obviously equity. You've got obviously investor funds. So again, if you can demonstrate that you are competent in what you're doing, or you've got experience in what you're doing, then you're reaching out to various different investor profiles, for anything ranging from friends and family to high net worth individuals, sophisticated investors. Obviously, when you are reaching out to these people, you've got to make sure that you are staying within the FCA regulations, and you are compliant. That is absolutely key. Everything that we want to do during this stage needs to be in alignment and in compliance with what needs to be done. Other options that you've got available is potentially equity that you've got in, it could be equity in businesses, it could be equity in property, it could be equity in other assets that you may have. And that goes the same for perhaps some investors, family, friends, things like that as well. So it's about educating people as well in terms of how they can achieve more of a return on their money that they either have in the bank, or they got perhaps tied up in a property or in a business. So there's some options in terms of the more of the personal side, and then obviously you've got more of the kind of institutional side and the business side, with it being your traditional sort of way of funding, where we're going to banks, development finance companies. You've got bridging loan sort of specialists, you've got peer-to-peer lenders. So you've got lots of different types of businesses and avenues available to you for funding. And obviously within those sort of sections, you have sort of subsections as well. So you've got your traditional banks that you've got challenger banks that are relatively new. You've got finance companies that are setting up, quite left, right, and center. But the key is aligning yourself, making sure you're going down the right avenue for the level of experience that you have. So it's less about, and this is one of the important things for investors and funders. It obviously the deal's got to work, right? So you've got to supply, the relevant appraisal information, and demonstrate and display that you have, got a thorough appraisal. You've looked at the exits. You put the right team together, but effectively the funders are often interested in aligning themselves with people that are, as I say, competent. So you have to then you've got to go to the routes that are appropriate for the level that you're at currently. And this is the thing when it comes to stacking your deals. You've got to make sure that you're allowed enough interest, and you've allowed enough, maybe whether it be profit share, whatever it may be, you've allowed enough in your appraisal that the funders can look at that and go, yes, this is a viable project, and the team that's put together is, they are going to deliver. Because ultimately funders are just looking for, firstly, protection over their money, and then obviously they're looking for the return as well. It's important at when looking at different ways of structuring sort of the funding package, if you like, and we will go into funding structures in a further video within this series, is to try and keep it as simple as you can, really. Obviously, there's lots of different ways that you can structure deals, but often the way that you structure deals are dictated to by, you know, how you're going to fund them. Because effectively, if you can't get funding, then it's kind of like the end of the line, really. So funders are considered, when we look at the various different people that we deal with throughout the entire process. Funders are generally considered as almost part of the VIPs. So you've got landowners, funders, and the local authority that are kind of the VIPs, because you've got to get all of those three people on board and able to enable you to actually have a project, right? The rest are your internal team, your external consultants. So, you know, you can buy that in. But it's the VIPs that we've got to take extra care of, and we've got to listen to, and we've got to put our case forward accordingly. So when it comes to structures, you know, it is advisable to keep them as simple as possible. Now, sometimes it's not always, you know, possible to keep them straight down the line and simple, because obviously, if you're going to, say, for example, offer to purchase the land, whether it's, you know, on the receipt of planning or whatever that may be, and you know, it's quite a bit of money, when you do your residual valuation and the number might not be enough for the landowner, in which case then you've got to look at perhaps more intricate sort of creative ways of financing and stacking the deal, whereby you might be bringing their own funds into this project, or into the process, or you might be delaying some of the payments. So you know, you might have £1 million piece of land, and you might pay 200,000 up front, and you might kick 800,000 to the back end. So it can become complicated, but the key is to keep it as simple as possible. So like we said with the deal structure, keep the deal structure as simple as possible, and that will hopefully enable you to keep the funding structure as simple as possible. So the most simple way that you can look at funding a project typically is, obviously we're talking acquisition, we're talking then the development, and then we're talking the exit. Well, typically when it comes to the acquisition of the land, the most simple way that you can obviously do that is purchasing outright using your own funds or investor funds, or a combination of both. Now, typically, which we will go into further videos, but typically, when it comes to dealing with investor funds that are perhaps looking at it from an equity perspective, then you're likely to be paying them a coupon rate, so a return on their money plus a profit share or an incentive based on profit as well. So if you can purchase land outright using funds, whether that be your own or a combination of investors, that will allow you to access development funding from a specialist development finance company. And if you purchase a site outright, you know, there's no other lending facility or anything that's come on board as for the acquisition, then you're likely to access 100% of the build cost from a finance company. So that then obviously sorts out that piece. Now, obviously, if you can't, if 100% isn't available to you for whatever reason, then obviously you've got to look to plug that gap. So that might be plugged with a different company, or it might be plugged with further investor funds or increased equity, you know, whatever that may be. You then obviously looking at the exit side of things, and typically, you know, traditionally as developers they are traders. So you're looking to sell the units on, in the sense of making it as simple as possible. You're going to sell the units on, but you've got to allow a sufficient holding period for sales to be completed and you to exit out of your finance. So that would be an example of a fairly simple structure, but as I said, we're going to go into different funding structures in a lot more detail further down the line. So effectively, that's your introduction to the funding process. And as I said before, what to look out for in coming videos. We're going to go into a lot more detail about things like the capital stack, cash flow, fundamentals of finance, terminology, all these kind of things will hopefully put you in a position where you are much more well informed in terms of where to go, what to do, what information to provide, and and hopefully that'll enable you to access the funds required for your projects moving forward. So I hope you found this one useful, and we're going to be going into more detail in subsequent videos. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next video. Thanks very much.